Try not to embarrass yourself tonight. I arranged someone special for you.
I looked toward table 7. A woman sat alone beneath a hanging light, wearing a dark green dress, her hands resting beside an untouched water glass. The chair next to her carried a place card with my name on it. Across the room, a camera had already been aimed at the table, not at the stage, not at the crowd, at us. Brooke never used the word special when she meant something kind. What she didn't know was that I had been signing since I was 14 years old. I noticed 4 things before I sat down. The fixed camera was the first. It stood against the west wall on a tripod, framed tightly enough to catch 2 faces and nothing else. Nobody films a company reunion that way. You film the room unless you already know where the interesting part is supposed to happen. The second was the card in the center of every other table explaining the opening icebreaker. Table 7 didn't have one. The third was Brooke's boyfriend, Cole Harwood, standing near the service entrance with an event clipboard and a headset hanging around his neck. When he saw me examining the camera, he looked away so quickly that the movement answered a question I had not yet asked. The fourth was the interpreter. She stood 10 feet behind the woman at table 7, hands folded, waiting in the neutral posture of a professional who had arrived prepared and discovered that nobody had told her where she was supposed to stand. That's when I understood the shape of the joke. Brooke had seated me beside a deaf woman, arranged for our table to be called first during a public introduction game, and aimed a camera at us so the room could watch me fail to communicate. She had planned everything except an interpreter. The woman had brought her own. I pulled out the chair and sat down. She turned toward me. Most people offer strangers a quick social smile, the kind that says, "I acknowledge your presence and hope neither of us has to work too hard." She didn't. She studied my face, then my hands, then my place card. She raised her eyebrows and signed, "Are you sure you're at the right table?" I signed back. "The card has my name. That doesn't mean somebody hasn't made a mistake." For half a second, she didn't move. Then one corner of her mouth lifted. Behind me, a fork struck a plate, and did not strike it again. The interpreter took 2 steps toward us, saw that she was not needed, and stopped. Near the stage, Brooke's heels broke rhythm. The woman signed, "Nora Keating." "Graham Prescott." She looked at my hands again. "Where did you learn?" "My younger brother was deaf. He didn't have the patience to wait for the rest of us to catch up." "What was his name?" "Luke." Her expression changed, not dramatically. Nora did not seem like a woman who gave the world more reaction than it had earned. But something in her attention sharpened. She asked me to spell my last name. Prescott. She looked toward the stage, where Brooke was speaking with the host, and then back at me. "I've seen that name before." "Where?" "In the corner of a drawing." The host tapped the microphone. "Welcome everyone to 10 years of Wayrite Public Image." The room applauded. Nora kept signing. "Ridgeway Center for Deaf Arts, original renovation plans. Your name was in the title block." For several seconds, the banquet hall seemed to lose its sound. I restore old libraries, theaters, community centers, and public buildings around Columbus. I don't have a website. I have never paid for an advertisement. People find me because somebody else tells them I know how to listen to a building before I change it. The rule I work by is simple. A building belongs to the people who use it, not to the name on the brass plate outside. For most of my life, I thought I understood that rule. Then my brother died. Luke was born deaf and impatient. My mother tried to learn to sign when he was small, but she learned one careful word at a time, like someone studying phrases before a vacation. Luke was not built to wait while the rest of us arranged our hands. I began learning when I was 14, because I couldn't stand watching him hold a thought in front of us while everybody searched for a way to receive it. Within a year, We were arguing fluently. That is how you know a language has gone into you. You stop using it only for kindness. Luke had opinions the way other people have furniture. They filled every room he entered. He kept a 10-point scale for coffee and never gave anything a 10. He said a 10 would destroy the incentive structure. When he wanted to know how a performance floor carried vibration, he didn't use an instrument. He lay flat on the boards with his palms down and his cheek against the wood until a stranger asked whether he needed medical attention. Then he stood up and announced that the northeast corner was dead. For 4 years, he volunteered at the Ridgway Center for Deaf Arts, a low brick building on the east side with narrow hallways, bad sight lines, and a bell system almost nobody inside could use. He carried a gray cloth notebook in his coat pocket. The notebook did not contain his ideas. It contained everyone else's. Luke went from student to student, asking what they would change about the center if somebody finally let them. Then he wrote down what they said, name by name. Amanda hated the hallway because she couldn't see who was approaching. Terrence wanted the floor to carry the drums into his feet. Maya wanted glass panels beside the classroom doors, so conversations did not vanish whenever someone stepped into the corridor. Luke never added one suggestion of his own. The students already know what they need, he told me. Nobody has bothered to write it down. He was killed in a traffic accident on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I will not describe that day. Some details belong to the people who survived them. What I did afterward was spend 11 months rebuilding Ridgway. I removed walls so nobody lost sight of another person's hands in the middle of a sentence. I replaced the bells with light alerts. I opened the workshop partitions with glass. I raised the performance floor so students could feel rhythm through their shoes. Every decision came out of Luke's notebook. I did not invent any of it. I only knew how to build it. I refused payment. I refused a plaque. I refused to let Ridgway place my name on the donor wall or above the entrance. The only place my name appeared was in the title block on the drawings, because somebody has to sign a construction set or the county will not review it. At the time, I believed disappearing was a form of respect. I know now that blank spaces do not remain blank. Brooke and I had been married 9 years. When we met, Wayrite Public Image occupied 400 square feet on the 3rd floor of a building whose freight elevator worked only if you struck the control panel with the side of your fist. 3 employees. 2 months when the payroll account came up short. 1 winter when I mortgaged the house my father left me and took night work so Brooke could keep the money inside the company. I framed the first office myself. Drywall, paint, electrical chases, floorboards laid on my knees over 6 weekends. The first 3 campaigns that made Wayrite visible were built on our kitchen table beneath printouts weighted down with coffee mugs. I was at that table. So was Brooke. I need to be honest about her because the version in which she was always a monster would make the story cleaner, and it would not make it true. Brooke worked harder than anyone I knew. She slept 4 hours a night for 2 years. She called potential clients until they answered from exhaustion, and then spoke so well they signed contracts. I loved her ambition before I became one of the things it consumed. After Ridgway reopened, she walked through the building and understood immediately that the story surrounding it could raise money. "Nobody donates to a building, Graham," she said. "People donate to a story." She was not entirely wrong. The campaign she created brought in real funding. That funding paid for programs. Children benefited. The problem was that she never asked whose story it was. She copied the renovation files into this Wayrite system. In the version used for the company's case study, the signature in the corner changed. My name disappeared. The case study described Luke as the inspiration behind Brooke Wright's mission of inclusive design. I appeared once, at the bottom of the 3rd page. Contractor. I found the document 4 months after Ridgway reopened. I asked her to correct it. She did not shout. That would have been easier. She sat across from me at the same kitchen table where we had built the company's first campaigns and said, "If I correct it, what's left of the story?" That was the end of the marriage, though the paperwork took another 4 months. After the divorce, Brooke told employees, clients, and mutual friends that I had become resentful of her success. She said I had never held a strategic role. She said I was a contractor who had begun demanding credit for work I did not understand. It was an efficient explanation. I said nothing. My mother asked me not to fight publicly. "Don't make people read about your brother in the gossip section," she said. She had buried a son. She was frightened, but the decision was mine. I was a grown man who chose silence and renamed it Dignity. A year and a half later, Wayrite announced its 10th anniversary reunion. Former employees, early clients, community partners, and funding organizations were invited. The printed card said Brooke wanted to thank everyone who had been present from the beginning. My mother encouraged me to attend. She thought people might stop believing Brooke's version if they saw me standing in a room without anger. That was not why I accepted. Marcus Vale, Wayrite's first bookkeeper, called me a week before the event. "There's something I need to ask you," he said. "What?" "I'd rather ask it in person." The conversation lasted 40 seconds. On the strength of it, I agreed to attend a celebration for a company that had spent 18 months explaining why I no longer belonged in its history. Now, Nora Keating sat beside me, telling me she had seen my name on Ridgway's original drawings. The host announced the opening game. "Then and now," he said brightly. "Each table will introduce the person beside them, guess how they're connected to Wayrite, and share a first impression." Table 7 would go first. Of course it would. Nora looked at the camera, and then at me. "Was this arranged?" "Yes." "Why?" "I think she expected me not to understand you." Nora watched Brooke cross toward the stage. Then she signed. "That creates a problem for her." I assumed she meant the embarrassment. I was wrong. Nora had been designing accessible public spaces for 15 years. For the previous 4, she had served as lead assessor for the Heartland Access Trust. No major accessibility grant in that part of the state moved forward without a report carrying her signature. 3 weeks before the reunion, a Wayrite application had crossed her desk. A city for everyone. Requested funding. $750,000. Ridgway was presented as the company's proof that it could lead a citywide inclusive design initiative. Nora had read the application twice. 3 details did not fit. First, the drawings supplied by Wayrite carried the company's authorship. The archive set submitted independently by Ridgway carried mine. Same dimensions, same lines, different signature. Second, the photographs presented as evidence of Wayrite's design involvement had been taken 6 months before the company signed any agreement with the center. Third, an earlier draft of the case study had been left inside the submitted files. In that version, Luke Prescott was identified as the brother of the project's designer. In the final version, he became the inspiration behind Brooke Wright's commitment to inclusive design. Nora had planned to investigate quietly. She had accepted the reunion invitation because partner organizations were included, and she wanted to observe the company before finishing her report. Brooke had seen one line on the attendance sheet: deaf. Interpreter requested. She had not read Nora's title. She had not read the name of her organization. She had not arranged the interpreter either. The Heartland Access Trust had. Brooke had carefully planned the table, the camera, and the order of speakers. She simply had not finished reading the spreadsheet. The host called our names. "Table 7, you're up." Nora signed. "Would you like to go first?" I stood. The microphone reached me. "This is Nora Keating," I said. "She thinks I'm either a client or an ex-husband, and apparently needs more information to decide which." The room laughed. Not at me. It was a small distinction, but after 18 months it felt larger than it should have. I added, "My first impression is that she pays attention." Then I handed her the microphone. Nora looked toward the interpreter, Dana Whitaker, who came to stand beside the table. Nora signed. Dana voiced. My name is Nora Keating. My first impression of Graham is that he was expected to fail at something he has known how to do for most of his life. The room went still. Brooke stepped forward with the smile she used when a client meeting began moving in the wrong direction. What Nora means, she said, is that Graham picked up some sign language years ago during a community project. It's wonderful how much of it stayed with him. 14 years old, my brother's entire adult life, every argument, hospital visit, birthday, job site disagreement, and late-night cup of coffee reduced to a weekend workshop. A few people laughed because Brooke's tone told them that laughter would make the discomfort disappear. Nora signed again. Dana said, "What exactly did you expect to be funny about seating him next to a deaf woman?" Nobody laughed then. Brooke's expression did not change. "It was a networking exercise," she said. "I'm sorry if the intention was misunderstood." "The camera was already pointed at this table," Nora replied through Dana. Cole looked down at his clipboard. Brooke glanced toward him and then returned her attention to the room. The events team handled the technical details. That sentence placed the blame exactly where she wanted it, and nowhere a person could hold it. Then she turned toward me. Her voice softened. "I do think some context is important." That was when I knew she had decided to make me the story. Brooke told the room that I had never held a strategic position at Wayrite. She said I had helped renovate the first office and had occasionally assisted with community projects. She said the marriage ended because I struggled with the imbalance between our careers. She said I had begun asking for professional credit after the divorce. She called Ridgeway a straightforward construction contract. Every sentence sounded plausible. I had never held a formal title. I had never requested equity. I had refused payment for Ridgeway. My name had disappeared from the files. For 18 months, I had remained silent. A bitter man with no evidence might have behaved exactly the same way. I looked across the room at people who had once known me. What I saw was not hostility. It was worse, gentle doubt. The relieved expression of people who had been given permission to stop examining an uncomfortable thing. That was when I understood what silence had done. I had not preserved my dignity. I had helped Brooke build her case. Nora rose. She did not wait to be invited onto the stage. She walked up the steps, removed the microphone from its stand, and introduced herself properly. Nora Keating, lead assessor, Heartland Access Trust. Dana stood below the stage and interpreted her voice for the room in the other direction when necessary. Nora named the application. Then she named the amount, $750,000. Every business person in the hall understood immediately that the evening had changed category. People set down glasses. The three senior account partners at the front table leaned forward. Brooke's smile became very still. Nora described the drawings. She did not accuse anyone of theft. She stated that two versions existed, identical except for attribution. She described the photograph metadata and the date of the contract. She explained that an image created 6 months before an agreement could not document work performed under that agreement. Then she described the draft file. Luke as the designer's brother in one version, Luke as Brooke's inspiration in another. She never raised her voice. That was what made it devastating. Anger gives people something to resist. Facts simply remain where you put them. I reached into my coat and removed Luke's notebook. Gray cloth, soft corners. I had carried it since the week after his funeral. Outside my family, nobody had ever seen it. I walked to the stage and opened it to one page. Amanda, hates the hallway, can't see who's coming. Terrence, wants the floor to shake for the drums. Maya, glass beside the doors so conversations don't disappear. Along the margin was a sentence in Luke's handwriting. Don't build a place they let us into. Build a place that was always ours. Nora placed the notebook beside the grant drawings, the raised floor, the glass panels, the open sight lines, the dead northeast corner marked in one of Luke's rough sketches. She said the design in Wayright's application matched the requests recorded in the notebook down to the floor heights and wall locations. "In 15 years," she said, "I have never seen a coincidence shaped this precisely." Brooke did not collapse. That was never her way. Under pressure, she became clearer. She carried a tablet to the account partners and displayed the signed Ridgway contract, the official timeline, and the electronic files stored under Wayright's name. Then she placed one document on the large screen behind the stage, a release authorizing the use of Luke Prescott's photographs. At the bottom was my mother's signature. Brooke turned toward the room. "Graham removed files from the company system during our divorce," she said. "I believe this confrontation was coordinated in advance. Our attorneys will determine whether tonight represents interference with an active funding process." She used the word defamation once, quietly. She did not need to explain it. The room tilted. You could feel people retreating toward the simpler version, two divorced people, competing documents, old grief, personal resentment, nothing anyone else needed to involve themselves in. I stared at my mother's signature enlarged across 12 feet of screen. Then a chair moved near the back. My mother was 71 and did not stand quickly anymore. Elaine Prescott put one hand on the table and lifted herself upright. Dana moved toward her, but my mother shook her head. She did not sign. She spoke. "The signature is mine." Brooke looked at her. My mother continued. 3 weeks after Luke died, Brooke came to my kitchen. She asked for photographs for a memorial video at Ridgway. Nobody moved. She told me people would remember my son. I signed because I wanted that to be true. Her voice weakened, but she did not stop. I did not give permission for his face to be used to raise money for her company. I did not know he would become a sentence in a grant application. She looked directly at Brooke. "I revoke it, tonight, in front of witnesses." Then she turned toward me. "I was the one who asked Graham to stay quiet. I was afraid people would turn Luke into gossip." She swallowed. Being afraid did not make me right. The documents had made the room uncertain. My mother's voice brought memory back into it. Marcus stood at table 5. He was the first bookkeeper Waywright ever employed, and he rose the way he did everything else, slowly, as though inconvenience were a moral category. He looked at me. "I asked you to come tonight because I wanted to know why you let her say you weren't there." I did not answer. So he faced the room. In Wayright's first 2 years, a substantial amount of payroll and operating expenses was reimbursed from a personal account. That account belonged to Graham Prescott. Brooke said, "Marcus, please." "I still have the ledgers." That ended the sentence. Rachel Boyd, Wayright's first creative director, remained seated but lifted her hand. "The first 3 major campaigns were built at Graham and Brooke's kitchen table," she said. "I was there, so was he." Others did not stand. They did not need to. You could see recognition moving through the room. Former employees looking at one another. People remembering floors, invoices, late nights, and meetings they had allowed Brooke's story to erase. Cole walked toward the camera. For a moment, I thought he intended to protect the recording. Instead, he switched it off. He removed the memory card and crossed the room. Then he set it beside my water glass. "I'm not filming this," he said. He looked at Brooke once and left through the service door. The representative from the Heartland Access Trust sat at table 1. His name was Walter Rennick. He was in his 60s, gray-haired, wearing a suit that looked chosen specifically not to be remembered. He stood without taking the microphone. "Consideration of Wayright's application is suspended effective immediately," he said. "A full audit will begin tomorrow." Brooke's face did not move. Then Rennick added, "The suspension will temporarily apply to all connected Ridgway files, including the center's independent application for a new facility." That was the moment I won. and it felt exactly like losing. Ruth Tanner, Ridgway's director, sat at table 11 with the event program folded in both hands. I had not known the center had submitted its own application. Enrollment had nearly doubled after the renovation. They had outgrown the building. For more than a year, they had been searching for a new home. Now that project was frozen because the same evidence that exposed Brooke had become attached to Ridgway's name. Ruth looked at me. She was not angry. She had the expression of someone calculating how to explain to 60 children that a building they had been promised might disappear. 2 major account partners left before dinner was served. The anniversary film began on the screen, played for 11 seconds, and stopped in the middle of Brooke's opening sentence. Someone removed the company logo. The screen remained gray. Brooke stood beneath it while the room decided what it believed about her. I had imagined that moment more times than I care to admit. In every version, it felt like justice. In the real room, it felt like smoke. I left through the service corridor. Outside, the air had turned cold. I sat on the concrete steps with my coat still buttoned. Luke's notebook was in my right pocket. Cole's memory card was in my left. My phone was in my hand. A reporter from the dispatch had sent me 3 messages. He had covered Waywright before. He wanted to know whether the Prescott named on the Ridgway drawings was the same man who had confronted Brooke Wright at the anniversary event. I had everything needed to destroy her before lunch the next day. The camera footage, the messages, the files, the witnesses. The story would have been irresistible. But beneath the headline would be a photograph of Luke. He would stop being the man who lay on floors to find dead vibration and become the deaf brother at the center of a public scandal. Ridgway would become a name people associated with fraud investigations. 60 children would lose a building while adults argued over credit. Brooke had used Luke to build her image. I was about to use him to burn it down. The fire door opened behind me and remained propped open. Nora came outside. She sat 1 step above me, angled so I could see her hands in the light from the corridor. She did not ask whether I was all right. I appreciated that. I was not, and neither of us needed to waste language pretending the question had another answer. She signed, "What do you want people to remember about Luke?" I looked at my phone. I don't know whether I still get to choose. You choose what you give the reporter. The audit already exists. The audit and the story are not the same thing. She explained that her report could go in one of 2 directions. The first would treat Ridgway and Waywright as one contested body of work. Every related application would remain frozen until attribution, contracts, and financial interests were resolved. 9 months if they were lucky, 18 if they were not. The second would separate Ridgway's project from Waywright's submission. To do that, Nora needed a formal record demonstrating that the design originated with Ridgway's community, that the renovation predated Waywright's involvement, and that I had never transferred ownership to the company. "I need a statement," she signed. "Something I can cite." Not the camera footage. A memory card creates spectacle. A statement creates a record. What happens to Brooke? The file history will answer that, on the correct timetable, in the correct jurisdiction. She watched me for a moment. The only thing you control tonight is whether your brother's face becomes tomorrow's headline. I took the memory card from my pocket and placed it in her hand. Then I went back inside. The room had thinned by a third. Half-cleared tables made the banquet hall look like a place people had abandoned during an emergency. Walter Rennick remained at table 1 with his coat over his arm. Ruth Tanner was still seated. My mother sat alone, both hands wrapped around a glass of water. Brooke stood near the doors, speaking quietly with one of the account partners. I stepped onto the stage. I took the microphone. "I have 3 things to say." The room settled. The first is about Nora Keating. Nora stood near table 7, Dana beside her. Most people in this room spent the last hour looking at her without seeing her. She has 15 years of experience designing spaces for people our institutions keep designing around. She was the only person here who read the entire funding application before speaking about it. I looked toward Brooke. An inclusive design campaign that launches without booking an interpreter is not inclusion. Seating a deaf woman beside someone as a joke is not outreach. It is set dressing. Nobody looked at the camera anymore. The second thing is about my brother. I opened Luke's notebook. Luke Prescott was not an inspiration statement. He was a man with a cruel 10-point coffee scale who never gave anything a 10. He knew the name of every student at Ridgeway, including the ones who had only been there a week and were still too shy to sign in front of anyone. My mother lowered her head. This notebook does not contain his ideas. It contains theirs. I held it up. He asked children what they needed and wrote down the answers. The open walls, the glass, the alerts, the raised floor. Those came from the students. I built them. Luke listened. Waywright did neither. Then I closed the notebook. The third thing is mine. Marcus watched from table 5. For 9 years, I made myself smaller so Brooke could become larger, and I called that love. Brooke looked at me. I refused titles. I refused payment. I kept my name off walls and out of meetings. I believed that was humility. I paused. It wasn't. It was avoidance. The microphone carried my breathing into the room. I left a blank space in the record of my own life, and then acted surprised when somebody wrote in it. I looked at the people who had believed Brooke because I had given them nothing else. That does not excuse what she did, but I will not stand here and claim I had no choices. I chose silence for 18 months. Marcus gave me a small nod. Silence is not always dignity. Sometimes it is just handing someone else the pen. Then I made the statement Nora needed. I described the origin of the drawings, Luke's notebook, the student interviews, the dates, my unpaid role, the absence of any transfer of ownership. I stated that Ridgeway's design had been completed before Waywright became involved. Then I requested 3 things publicly. The original drawings returned to Ridgeway with accurate attribution on every sheet. Luke's image and story removed from all Waywright commercial material. And permanent authority over Ridgeway's public story placed with its students, teachers, and families. Not with Waywright, and not with me. Financial questions and audit matters will be addressed in writing, I said. Those belong in documents, not in a dinner party performance. I returned the microphone to the stand. Nobody applauded. I was grateful. Applause would have returned the statement into another show. Brooke found me near the coat rack 20 minutes later. People pretended not to watch. She stood close enough to speak quietly. Tell them I made a mistake. I looked at her. Say I was under pressure. Say the firm nearly collapsed twice. Say ambition got away from me. Even then, she was writing the sentence she wanted someone else to deliver. A mistake happens in a moment, I said. Her eyes hardened. You chose the table. You chose the camera. You chose which table would be called first. You saw that Nora was deaf and never bothered to learn anything else about her. I didn't know who she was. That's the point. She looked past me at the room she had built for herself. Do you want me destroyed? No. She searched my face, perhaps because she thought the answer had come too quickly. I'm finished protecting you from the consequences of things you chose on purpose, I said. That is not the same as destroying you. She left before I did. I have not spoken to her since. I drove my mother home. We sat in her driveway with the engines running. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then I said, I understand why you were afraid. She looked down at our hands between the seats. But understanding why something happened doesn't undo what it cost, I said. And I don't want you apologizing for the rest of your life. I know, She took my hand. We sat that way for several minutes. It was the first honest silence we had shared since Luke died. 9 days later, Walter Rennick called. The trust had accepted Nora's finding that the Ridgway design predated Wayright's involvement. The hold on the center's independent application was lifted. Wayright's application remained suspended. The audit continued. The files and internal messages entered the record without my sending them to a reporter. No newspaper printed Luke's photograph. 2 founding shareholders later activated a buyout clause in Wayright's operating agreement. Brooke left the executive role. She was not arrested. She did not lose everything. She lost control of the story. That was enough. Ruth Tanner called me the afternoon Ridgway's funding hold was removed. "We want you to consult on the new building," she said. I told her I had one condition. I said it carefully because I had spent 18 months learning that modesty can become dishonesty when practiced in the wrong direction. "I come in as the builder, not the brand. My name does not go on the outside of the building to make it more fundable." Ruth waited. "But it stays on every drawing I produce, every meeting record, every document where the work belongs to me." "Good," she said. "And Ridgway leads. I follow." That was the plan before I called. 6 months later, a decommissioned rail depot on the east side of Columbus had its roof stripped back to the trusses. 40 feet of open span ran through the center, where freight platforms had once divided the room. It was becoming the new Ridgway Center for Deaf Arts. The design team included teachers, parents, students, deaf artists, and 2 access consultants recommended by Nora. I sat at the end of the table and took notes. It was not a symbolic seat. I was overruled regularly. Once, a group of students asked us to raise the performance floor 4 inches higher than I had drawn it. The old freight slab absorbed more vibration than expected, and students at the back could not feel the drums clearly. I checked the structural load, recalculated the joists, found the additional $11,000, then built it exactly as they requested. It was the best decision in the building. At the north end, there is a workshop beneath a long skylight. The plate beside the door reads, "Luke Prescott Workshop." Inside the entrance, a line is cut into the concrete lintel where it can be seen from the street. Don't build a place they let us into. Build a place that was always ours. My name is not on the front of the building. There is no donor plaque with Prescott engraved on it. That was my decision. But my name is in the corner of every drawing. It is in the Trust's archive. It is in the meeting minutes, including the meetings where I was wrong. It exists in every place where it would matter if someone tried to remove it. That is the difference. The first time, I stayed invisible because I was afraid of being seen. This time I stepped back because the building did not belong to me. Those things can look identical from across a room. They are not. Last month, I was checking a rail on the mezzanine when a boy of about 10 approached me. He signed, "Are you the man who built all this?" I looked down at the performance floor. Children were running across it, stopping in the center when they felt the first drum beat rise through their shoes. I told him, "Everybody here built it. I'm only the person who knew how to listen." He considered that and nodded, as if the answer met some private standard. Nora stood near the entrance, watching. She caught my eye and made one small movement with both hands, the sign we had begun using during construction whenever a difficult thing finally worked. Brooke had seated Nora beside me because she believed a deaf woman would expose what I could not do. She never considered that Nora might be the person who saw exactly what I had done. I have never been good at being noticed. I do not know how to build an image, but I know how to listen to someone long enough that what they need changes what I make. It turns out that is a skill. It turns out it was the only one that mattered. Silence is not always dignity. Sometimes it is only handing someone else the pen and hoping they are kind with your life. But telling the truth doesn't have to become revenge. You can place the facts on the record without setting another person on fire. You can reclaim your name without putting it above the door. And the strongest truth is not the one that destroys someone. It is the one that returns the voice to the people it was taken from and helps them build something nobody can quietly take away again.